Hello, everyone. Very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. So, before we start, can you please let me know if the audio video is fine? Because we were facing a technical issue before we could start. So, I would like to get a confirmation before I begin if the audio is clearly visible and the video if it is clearly visible. Sounds good? Okay. So, welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Let's begin our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen seven important articles for a detailed analysis. We have five major articles relevant for both prelims and mains exam, and two small articles which are more important for the prelims examination. So let's cover them comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. Now, before I start, I have a very important announcement. Unacademy has been conducting the UPSC Summit, which is a flagship event that brings together top bureaucrats and athletes, celebrities, and our top educators together as they conduct these special classes on the Unacademy app to motivate you and inspire you and provide you the strategy and inputs which could help you clear the UPSC civil services examination. The summit started yesterday. I'm sure many of you would have attended these sessions. Today as well, the summit continues, and we have some exciting sessions lined up from our top educators and as well as by several retired bureaucrats, serving bureaucrats, toppers, etc. So do ensure you attend these sessions live on the Unacademy app, and the link for the same is provided in the video description below. And if you want the PDF of the Hindu analysis session, please join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. After the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF over here. So, with this, let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 12, there's an important article related to disaster management and environment and ecology. This topic is related to a recent disaster, an industrial disaster that occurred in Telangana. I'm sure many of you would have read about this development. Last week, there was a tragic blast at a pharmaceutical plant on the outskirts of Hyderabad, and nearly 39 workers were killed in this tragic accident. It was a massive explosion that was reported at a pharmaceutical plant. So, this industrial tragedy which has occurred in Telangana reminds us of the risks of industrial disasters. How can we approach industrial disasters from a disaster management point of view? And what really happened at this plant in Telangana? Were there any shortcomings with regard to the regulatory norms, with regard to the safety norms and procedures? Because in India, we keep on hearing about these industrial accidents and tragedies. Every year, there are multiple such incidents. Either there is a boiler blast, or the leakage of a hazardous chemical, or a fire accident, or such explosions, which keep on recurring in India's factories and industries. And this not only affects the workers, it affects the entire sector. It hurts the image of India as well. And there is a devastating, long lasting impact that is left behind through such industrial tragedies and disasters. After all, India has suffered one of the world's worst industrial disasters, the Bhopal gas tragedy back in 1985, and it appears we haven't learned our lessons. In the last 4 or 5 years alone, there have been multiple industrial tragedies, and innocent workers and people have paid the price. So this points towards the responsibility of the industry, the factory owners, the responsibility of the government and the authorities. The question is, are they being held accountable for these lapses and failures, as many of the industrial disasters can be entirely avoided? So, to understand this, we need to dive deep into this topic, understand what exactly happened at this pharmaceutical plant in Telangana. Initially, the explosion at the pharma plant in Telangana was expected to be a high pressure blast, most likely triggered by a hazardous chemical or a hazardous liquid. But experts have ruled out this cause, and initial studies have already shown that this was most likely a dust explosion. So, what is a dust explosion? This can be an important topic for prelims. UPSC might ask a basic question on dust explosion, which is a recurring industrial accident. In a dust explosion, very fine dust, which is scattered and compressed in chambers, when it comes in contact with oxygen and an ignition source, it can easily ignite and it can cause a massive explosion. Such fine dust explosion is often seen in flour mills, sometimes even in bakeries, even in coal mines, in grain silos, and as well as in certain industries and factories where fine dust is produced. So it's quite a common accident. When fine dust is dispersed in these chambers where it is being produced, under the forces of compression, confinement, with a source of ignition, with the availability of oxygen to fuel the combustion, this flammable dust material can easily catch fire and it can explode in a violent manner. So, in grain silos, such explosions are very common, even in coal mines, bakeries, and flour mills, and as well as in certain industries, especially in few pharmaceutical industries. Now, if you look at this factory in Telangana, this pharmaceutical plant, it was basically turning wood pulp into a fine powder which is used in the manufacturing of drugs. When medicines are produced, to carry the active pharmaceutical ingredient, non reactive material is used, such as wood pulp, which is turned into fine powder. It doesn't react with the drug or it doesn't affect the human body, right? These are non reactive platforms which are used to deliver the drug. So, using wood pulp, a type of cellulose is generated in these pharmaceutical plants where they basically remove the entire moisture content from the wood pulp, dry it out, and break it up into fine powder like substance, which becomes a non reactive drug carrier. This cellulose, microcellulite cellulose, it is vulnerable to catch fire under the right conditions. And that is what happened most likely in Telangana. Right now, the government has set up a special committee to investigate this accident to find out whether there were any lapses on the part of the factory management, on the part of the authorities, and especially in terms of following the regulations and safety norms. So, this appears to be a case of dust explosion. So, please know what is a dust explosion and in which factories and industries it is seen and how does it occur. This could be a possible prelims question. Now, coming back to our core topic, which is the topic of disaster management. Now, how do we approach industrial tragedies from a disaster management point of view? The industrial disasters are no doubt a man made disaster. We will discuss the various causes and contributing factors to industrial disasters, but first, it's important to understand, is there a failure of safety norms in India? Is there a failure of regulatory norms in India? Because these tragedies keep on recurring year after year. We have seen such recurring tragedies taking place in the country, especially where high temperature, high pressure conditions exist. For example, in factories where furnaces are used, in factories where boilers, industrial boilers are used. For example, in thermal power plants, in metallurgical industries, fertilizer based industries, wherever high temperature, high pressure conditions exist, where furnaces, boilers are used, explosions have been quite common, fire accidents have been quite common. There are several industries and factories that work with hazardous raw materials and even produce highly toxic materials. So, in many cases, the leakage of these toxic hazardous substances into the factory premises, into the environment, has caused these tragedies. We have seen gas explosions taking place, we have seen fire accidents in several factories and industries. We have seen structural collapse as well in certain industries. Now, the question is, why do these incidents keep on recurring? In many cases, this is largely due to negligence, due to the failure to follow the established protocols, the failure to implement the safety norms. Because, see, we don't have a lack of laws and policies and regulations. The country has enough safety norms, there are enough laws in this regard. We have the Environment Protection Act, we have the Factories Act, we have the Disaster Management Act of 2005. There are plenty of laws available, plenty of laws and regulations and policies in place. But the problem is with enforcement. Now, if you look at the recent accident, the blast in Telangana at this pharmaceutical plant, when the disaster response forces and the fire services arrived at the tragedy site, the green board, which is mandatory to be displayed, was completely missing. You know what's a green board? It's also known as an environmental display board. In front of every hazardous factory, any factory where there is a possibility of pollution, environmental pollution, where there is a possibility of leakage of hazardous substances, these companies, factories are mandatorily supposed to put up a green board, or also known as the environment display board. And this is mandated by the Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Board. They are supposed to enforce this on the ground. So, if at all there is a tragedy, when fire services, emergency services, and disaster response forces arrive at the plant to rescue the workers and the people who are trapped or injured, they can read the board, they'll know what type of chemicals or hazardous substances are involved, and accordingly, they will plan their response. So, during this tragedy in Telangana, it was a very prominent pharmaceutical company, by the way. It was listed on the stock exchanges as well. So when the response workers arrived and the emergency services arrived, there was no green board, no details regarding as to what the plant was doing. So fire services and emergency response forces, they had no clue what to do. They had no idea what they were dealing with. So that clearly points towards the lack of safety in our industrial practices, the lack of enforcement of the regulatory norms, the failure of the authorities, the failure of the factory owners. See, this points towards pure negligence, failure of SOPs, standard operating protocols, and a complete neglect of safety in the industry. And the responsibility has to be shared by the industry, right? By the entire industry, by the factory owners, and by the authorities, by the government. The government is as much responsible as that of the industry. The failure lies on both the sides. And this is quite alarming. It's quite worrying because these incidents, which are recurring every now and then, it can harm the entire sector and the image of the entire industry in front of the world, which could hurt our economic prospects. Now, see, Telangana is a major hub for life sciences, biotech, and pharma industry in our country. I don't know if you know this. Almost one third of India's pharma production is happening in the state of Telangana. One fifth of our pharma exports is coming from the state of Telangana alone. And what is even more important is that one third of global vaccine production is taking place in Telangana. So clearly, Telangana is a hub, not just for India, it is even a global hub for life sciences, biotech, medical sciences, pharmaceutical industry. And such tragedies and incidents, which keep on recurring every now and then, can hurt the image of the entire industry. Because, see, India is considered as a pharmacy of the world. We are one of the largest exporters of vaccines and generic drugs. And markets like US, Europe, Australia, even Africa, they all expect very high standards of safety, quality, hygiene, and control. And when they see such tragedies occurring, And they also see repeated cases coming up where the drugs were of inferior quality or produced in plants where safety measures were not followed. This eventually affects the export potential of India's drugs and vaccines. The export potential can be compromised because if you look at regulators in US and Europe, for example, if you look at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administrative Authority in the US, it has very stringent standards about safety, about quality of drugs. And if they come across such incidents, they might place a ban on the entry of certain drugs from India. This could hurt the entire industry, the entire sector itself, right? Even in Africa, there have been many incidents where spurious and inferior quality drugs from India have apparently triggered certain incidents, including the death of children and patients, which has led to serious allegations against India at the global level, which hurts the export potential of our pharma industry. So, that is also a reason why we should take industrial safety very, very seriously. Along with maintaining the quality of the product which is being produced, it's equally important to focus on the safety of our industrial processes. That is why you need to understand what are the causes for these industrial accidents which keep on recurring in our country. See, there are many causes. Industrial accidents can occur because of natural disasters as well. Natural disasters like, let's say, earthquakes or floods, right? These natural disasters, even cyclones for that matter, they can cause damage to industrial equipment and result in an industrial accident. But apart from that, there are several man made factors which are responsible for industrial accidents. Usually, it is negligence, poor maintenance, failure to follow the standard operating protocols, neglect to repair and service the equipment frequently, the overall neglect when it comes to replacing spare parts, or also the lack of training to the professionals who are operating the plant. All these factors are responsible. It could even be a case of sabotage. Maybe a disgruntled employee could deliberately sabotage the plant. Or it could even be a case of terrorism, where a terror group might even target a hazardous industrial facility to cause a bigger attack. But apart from natural disasters, sabotage, and terrorism, right, which is a completely different game altogether, the bigger concern is about negligence and the failure of protocols and the lack of training and the lack of safety norms. That is what is more concerning. In most accidents that have taken place, if you take just the last 5 years, for example, in most incidents, these accidents were preventable. If proper maintenance of equipment was done, if proper repair and servicing was done on time as per the SOPs which are laid down, if the regulatory norms were followed, most of these accidents, they were essentially preventable. So usually it's a failure of the implementation of regulatory norms, the neglect in the overall maintenance of the plant, because industries are looking to cut corners. They want to reduce their expenses, increase their profit margin, right? And there happens to be a corrupt nexus, a collusion as well between some industry owners and the authorities, the inspectors who inspect the plants and facilities. So this leads to poor implementation of the regulations on the ground. And these violations eventually lead to these tragedies, resulting in loss of life. This could damage the environment as well, resulting in ecological damage. It could lead to destruction of property and infrastructure. So these disasters have a widespread impact. The impact of industrial disasters can be large scale. Not only human life can be lost, not only people can be injured grievously, there could be loss of property, loss of infrastructure, and there could even be ecological damage. Very, very serious ecological damage can be witnessed. In fact, Hyderabad has already become quite notorious for alarming levels of pharmaceutical water pollution in the Musi River. The Musi River is rated as the 22nd most polluted river in the world on the index of pharmaceutical water pollution, because the water of the Musi is highly contaminated with active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is directly released from the pharma industry and the biotech and life science industries that are present around the outskirts of Hyderabad. This also points towards very poor pollution control and pollution standards which are being followed. Essentially means the effluents are not being treated. They are being directly released into the water body. And the Musi River reports alarming levels of drug presence and API presence, which is even contributing to antimicrobial resistance. And these are very serious concerns, and authorities are not acting upon it. They are failing to implement the existing regulations. So, what can be done from a disaster management perspective? See, when you look at disaster management provides for a structured response. It provides for a holistic response. Under the Disaster Management Act of India, we have a three-step cycle which has been created. We have the pre-disaster phase, during disaster phase, and post-disaster phase. India has adopted a cyclical approach to disaster management and a structured response to disaster management. So, in pre disaster, that is before the disaster can occur, you focus on planning, you focus on preparedness. This is where regular audits have to be conducted, the regulatory norms have to be strictly enforced, adequate early warning systems can be installed to prevent the tragedies from escalating or to provide prior warning and forecasting. For example, to detect smoke and fire, alarms and sensors can be installed. Today, AI can be better used to detect any possible structural failure as well in the component and the equipments used in factories and industries, right? So, planning and preparedness, which covers implementation of the regulatory norms, ensuring regular security audits, implementing early warning systems, and also developing the capabilities to deal with those disasters. That all happens in pre disaster phase under planning and preparedness. Then, during disaster, when the disaster has occurred or when the disaster is still ongoing, the focus will shift to emergency response. The focus will be on immediate relief, rescuing as many people as possible, saving lives, giving immediate first aid and health access so that those who are injured, they could be their lives could be saved, and as many people as possible can be rescued. So, rescuing the people, saving lives, and containing the damage becomes the priority during disaster. For this, you need professional trained forces like the NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, who are not only trained but well equipped to deal with hazardous uh, disaster sites. Because these industrial sites, they could be sites of contamination. There could be a dangerous chemical or a gas or a fire which is present. So the response forces should be well equipped and well trained to deal with these hazardous situations. And finally, post disaster, what do you do after the disaster? You focus on compensation, compensate the victims, ensure that those who are displaced they are rehabilitated, and you reconstruct, you build back what was lost. So this is how you can achieve disaster risk reduction, which is also the mantra of the Sendai framework, which was adopted by the United Nations. To achieve disaster risk reduction is the goal of Sendai framework. You can reduce the disaster risk by reducing the vulnerability, by managing the hazard. And that is what needs to be done in case of industrial disasters. With better enforcement of rules, better enforcement of regulations, with better implementation of safety norms, number of these accidents can be prevented, the vulnerability can be brought down, the hazard can be contained, and automatically the disaster risk will go down. Now, if you look at industrial projects, for example, one basic measure that can be implemented in pre disaster planning is something known as zoning, which is part of land use planning. So when industrial clusters and corridors are created, Adequate care has to be taken that residential neighborhoods don't come up around industrial clusters. You might have seen many years ago, many decades ago, usually these industrial clusters were present on the outskirts and suburbs of our cities, be it in Hyderabad, be it in Delhi, be it in Bengaluru, in any city. You would have seen that industrial clusters, maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, they were primarily on the outskirts, on the suburbs. But today, rampant urbanization, unplanned expansion, the illegal way in which real estate has expanded, it has surrounded the industrial clusters, and today you have dense residential colonies right in the middle of industrial clusters, right around these industrial clusters, and many of them are hazardous industries. Obviously, when tragedies occur, it will have a widespread impact. So, implementing zoning, ensuring that land is planned properly, it is utilized in an efficient manner, and hazardous industries are kept away from other corridors is very essential to contain and minimize the damage. This is an essential aspect of planning and preparedness. But thanks to rampant urbanization, zoning has basically gone out of the wind. So these are the challenges that India needs to address. There are pressing issues in front of India because if they are not addressed, these incidents will keep on recurring. So take up this practice question based on what we have discussed. Despite the enactment of several safety laws and institutional frameworks, industrial disasters continue to recur in India. Analyze the causes behind this trend and suggest measures to strengthen disaster risk reduction in the industrial sector. Now, this is a topic which UPSC has not asked till now. So it's a highly anticipated topic given the recent tragedies which have occurred. So please prepare for this, and I will help you with this question by giving you a model approach. I will give you certain points and the structure and the flow so that your answer writing will start improving. This is something we will do regularly, at least for one question every day. In the Hindu analysis, we'll try to discuss the model answer writing approach with some key points and the structure. Especially for beginners, I think this should be very helpful. So please let me know if you would like us to continue with this approach where we discuss at least one answer along with the answer writing approach with some key points and the structure. So for this particular question, what you can do, first read the question carefully, understand what the question is asking. The question is clearly focused on recurring industrial accidents in India. The question says we have enough laws, we have enough regulations, but still these accidents keep on recurring. So what's happening? What can be done? That is the focus of the question. So start your answer with a good introduction about industrial disasters. Try to define them in your own words. You don't have to mug up and by heart. To understand the concept, you can express this in your own words. You can mention that industrial disasters are man made disasters essentially. They are sudden, large scale incidents in an industrial setting that can cause significant loss of life, which can cause damage to property and infrastructure and ecological damage as well. Because in the industry, there could be hazardous substances and toxic substances present, which could be released into the environment during these accidents. So, in one small paragraph, maybe in 2 to 3 lines, define an industrial disaster and cite some examples. Whatever examples you're aware of, be it the Bhopal gas tragedy, the benchmark case in India, or any recent incident which has been in current affairs, like the explosion that happened at the pharmaceutical plant in Telangana, or the gas leak that happened in 2020 during the lockdown at a LG plant in Vishakhapatnam. Any of these incidents you're aware of, right? Recently, there was a boiler explosion as well in one of the NTPC plants. Any such example can be cited here just to substantiate your argument and your definition of an industrial disaster. Then, in the body, you have to talk about the causes of industrial disasters. What you can do, you can try to create a table, right? Or simply draw a line to create 2 columns and you try to list out the reasons and what are the causative factors for these industrial tragedies. You can mention natural causes as well, right? Natural disasters can also cause industrial disasters. Apart from that, please focus on the institutional failure, the technical failure, the human failure, the policy failure, and the pressure from urbanization, which is all contributing to increasing cases of industrial accidents. Maybe one line about each cause, one explanation, trying to explain why these accidents are occurring. For example, how human negligence, lack of training, failure to follow SOPs can contribute to accidents. Just one line in one small table, and this would effectively express what you're trying to bring out in the answer. Then, in the next part of the body, you have to talk about the gaps in our institutional and legal framework in slight detail. Talk about the overlapping jurisdiction of multiple agencies in this particular domain. We have disaster management authorities at the national, state, and district level. Then we have separate authorities at the state level. We have pollution control boards at central and state level. So there is a clear overlapping jurisdiction between various central and state authorities and agencies. And this leads to the shifting of blame. One agency will blame the other, one department will blame the other. You also need to mention that under the existing laws, such as the Factories Act, for example, the compliance mechanisms, the audit which is needed is very, very poor, very lax. This is often misused. And you can even mention the corrupt nexus I was talking about between inspectors and authorities and the factory owners. They try to cut corners, they try to violate the established regulations, they try to go around it by bribing the officials, and they still manage to get their licenses and certificates, even though they're not following and complying with the safety standards. So try to mention these loopholes which are present in the system. Try to expose the gaps present in the system. So that way, you are adding some technical details as well from a legal perspective. Then talk about the solutions, because you have to be a problem solver as well. It's not just important to highlight the problems and the shortcomings, you have to provide solutions. So, in the last part of the body, maybe try to provide 4 or 5 suggestions as to what can be done to prevent these industrial disasters. Regulatory strengthening, capacity building, better zoning and planning, policy intervention, community engagement. Right? I've just given you an outline. You can add maybe one line under each heading, and that completes your body. And in the conclusion, try to present a way forward. Maybe, if possible, use a quote. Disasters are not natural, they are failure of planning, which is a quote by the UN Office on Disaster Risk Reduction. Right? You can try to use such quotes if you can remember it. Or don't worry about quotes. Just talk about the core topic here. Talk about the culture of safety which has to be promoted. Point out that the lack of safety in our industries is because we lack that culture, right? There is a habit to violate the regulations and norms. Talk about the importance of building that culture of safety and try to elaborate upon this. What can be done? How can we build more accountability? How can we ensure these accidents don't recur? On those lines, try to end your answer, and that will make for a very good structure with all the relevant points with sufficient examples. So let's see if you guys can write an answer to this question, and please post them in the in the comment section below. Now let's look at the next article on page 12. We have another interesting article which is related to the language wars, the language divide, which is coming up in different parts of the country. This time it's with Maharashtra. In Maharashtra, large protests have erupted against the alleged imposition of Hindi, especially at the school level. The Maharashtra government recently notified the implementation of one of the key pillars of the NEP, the National Education Policy of 2020, which provides for a three language formula starting from primary schools. In Maharashtra, both public and private schools, they already provide two languages at least. One, of course, being Marathi, the regional language, the mother tongue of most of the students, along with English. But when it comes to the third language, recently Maharashtra government took these measures to make Hindi as a mandatory third language. And this has been met with protests by local political parties and regional political groups as they have raised the allegation of Hindi imposition, how NEP is being used as a backdoor by the center to allegedly push Hindi on non Hindi speaking states. Because similar allegations and concerns have come up from other states as well, from Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala. Several non Hindi speaking states have been raising this allegation, triggering a huge controversy in the country that allegedly the central government, right, is imposing Hindi on other states, on non Hindi speaking states. So let's evaluate this debate from a very neutral viewpoint. Let's look at both sides of the argument. The center says NEP doesn't even mandate a three language formula. It gives flexibility to the states to decide what are the three languages that will be taught. The NEP doesn't mandate the imposition of Hindi, and the central government is right in that regard. Then where is this allegation coming from? The allegation that NEP is being used as a backdoor by the center to push Hindi or non-Hindi speaking states. Why is there such stiff opposition? Previously, let's say 20 years ago, we would never see such opposition. In many states, Hindi was always seen as a third language in non-Hindi speaking states. But today, you see a strong opposition against it. Why is this happening? So, to understand this, first we need to look at NEP and the language policy that Indian schools have followed, the language system that we have followed in our education system, and what is the best scientific method and the best suitable method for India. Now, if you look at the previous education policy of 1986, according to this 1986 education policy, both in public schools, in government schools, and private schools, three languages were encouraged. There would be something called as the home language, which is nothing but usually the mother tongue of the child, right? Or would be the regional local language in that particular state, in that particular region. Of course, English would be seen as the global link language. Hindi would be seen as the national link language. Generally, this is what was followed in several schools across the country. I'm sure many of you who grew up in this schooling system, right, would have no objection to study different languages. You would not only study your mother tongue, your regional language, you would also gain some proficiency in English and some proficiency in Hindi, at least to hold a conversation and to build basic communication skills. Because being multilinguistic is a skill, it's a talent. And usually there wouldn't be such opposition, let's say 15, 20, 30 years ago. But today you see such strong opposition, and many of them blame the NEP and the way in which the center is trying to misuse the NEP. See, NEP, if you look at NEP, the NEP recommends that encouraging children to learn in their mother tongue, it is proven to have benefits at an early age, especially in the childhood formative years, right? When primary school children are taught in the mother tongue itself, when the medium of instruction is also in the mother tongue, scientific studies have established a better learning outcome, a better cognitive development on the part of the child. And studies have also parallelly shown that children have a natural talent at a younger age to develop multilinguistic skills. If you expose them to, let's say, two, three, or even four languages, they have the ability to inculcate them and develop some skills at least in different languages. And this is a skill set which the child can use as they grow up. So, NEP does encourage multilingualism, it does promote multilingualism, keeping in mind the diversity of linguistic heritage of India, keeping in mind the linguistic diversity of the nation, right? The different languages that are spoken across the country. NEP does focus on encouraging the linguistic diversity and promoting multilingualism. So, where is this concern coming from? Now, if you look at the education policy of 1968, Hindi, English, and one of the modern regional Indian languages was always the priority. But problem with NEP is that though it does not mandate any third language, it does provide for a three language formula. It leaves it to the states to decide as to what would be the third language. But it does speak heavily in favor of promoting Sanskrit and the classical languages, which is still fair, which is still acceptable as the government seeks to promote India's rich tradition and heritage. There is a certain push given through the education policy to try and include Sanskrit and the classical languages like Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam, and others in the schooling system. But the NEP explicitly does not tell a state to include Hindi as the third language. It gives the flexibility for the states to decide. But the problem here is the states have a point, the states have a very valid argument. The problem here is the third language, it has to be provided in non Hindi speaking states. The availability of teachers, the availability of books, material, and even sufficient students opting for that language all becomes a challenge, a practical challenge for the governments, which means they have to mobilize more resources, train more teachers, make them available. And if at all students are looking to opt for a third language, now let's say in a state like Tamil Nadu, obviously Tamil and English would be taught. If a third language is introduced, let's say Malayalam, there should be enough number of students willing to learn Malayalam. Then the school should be able to find and arrange teachers, books, and material. This takes a lot of effort. Operationally, practically, it's very challenging to do this. So many states have a problem with implementing the third language because of this practical constraints which are there. And the argument of imposition is coming up these days very strongly from states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, now even Maharashtra, and many other non-Hindi speaking states, even from West Bengal, Odisha, many other non-Hindi speaking states are also essentially complaining about the alleged Hindi imposition by the center. This allegation mainly comes up because of the politics surrounding language. Of late, some of our politicians and political parties have been trying to politicize the language issue for their own benefits. There are few national parties and leaders who are trying to milk this issue deliberately, trying to impose one identity on the nation. Though they may not be serious about it, the statements they are making, the rhetoric that they are delivering, it divides the population on linguistic lines and triggers the issues of identity, it triggers an emotional response as any group of people, any group of linguistic people would be proud of their linguistic heritage and identity. And if any outside attempt is noticed to hurt that linguistic heritage, there will be a counter response to it. For example, Union Home Minister Amit Shah has made very controversial statements about Hindi being pushed across non Hindi speaking states. Or he recently made a very controversial statement. Uh, he said that English speakers would be ashamed in the coming days. So, this is something that hurts the sentiments, the identity that people attach with their language. And they feel that the politicization of the issue of language, it gives that color, it gives that image that the center is trying to push a certain language on the others. And the regional political parties and politicians are no less. They are exploiting it to their own advantage. In states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, there are various linguistic groups and parties. Their main vote bank is from the linguistic base, right? In Maharashtra, the Marathi vote is a strong vote bank. In Tamil Nadu, right, there are many who vote on the lines of language. In Karnataka as well. So there are political parties, leaders who exploit this to their own advantage and blame everything on the center as well. So this tutu meme contest which is going on between center and states, the unnecessary politicization of this, the rhetoric from the central government, especially from senior leaders, ministers, is what triggers this controversy. It ends up not only dividing our people, but it creates an unnecessary issue. Because, as I said, 20 years ago, when students were learning three languages in schools, nobody had a problem with it. Everybody thought it was a good skill to have. More languages, the better. Studies have shown exposing children at a young age to at least 2 to 3 languages is very good for their cognitive development. Even children can be receptive up to 3 to 4 languages at a young age. So gradually in our schooling system, we've been accustomed to learning minimum 3 languages, maybe a fourth optional language, right? Maybe another Indian language or a foreign language. And this has always worked well. Can't deny the fact that English happens to be a global link language. If you aspire for jobs, if you aspire to improve your status, speaking English is absolutely essential. It's not just a colonial relic or a hangover. It's not because of that Indians are obsessed with English. No. English is something that fetches you a job. English is something that fetches you a livelihood. At the same time, Hindi can be a link language, but when it is pushed, when it is imposed at the cost of regional languages, that is where the counter response comes from. So, this linguistic debate which has been triggered is largely an unnecessary debate. It's purely the politics of language which we are seeing. But otherwise, the NEP or the previous language policies, they have worked well for India. So let me know what you think on this particular issue. It's a very divisive issue, I know that. So let me know your views on this and take up this practice question. The NEP 2020 advocates a three-language formula aimed at promoting multilingualism in India. So that is the opening statement. So it's focused on NEP's three-language formula and promotion of multilingualism. Critically examine the implications of this formula on India's diverse linguistic landscape and discuss the challenges and potential benefits it holds for the education system. You have to talk about the challenges and the benefits, both. So please try to practice your answer writing using this question. Next, we have another article on page 12 that focuses on the ELI scheme, which has been recently approved by the Union Cabinet. So, what is the ELI scheme? Let's understand this quickly and look at the pros and cons of this scheme. This can be important for both prelims and mains. ELI stands for Employment Linked Incentive Scheme, which was announced by the Government of India in the 2024-2025 Union Budget. In the recent budget, the government has announced this scheme, the Employment Linked Incentive Scheme, to incentivize the creation of jobs, particularly in the manufacturing sector, especially the creation of first time jobs to attract first time workers into the industry. The focus is primarily on manufacturing industry, but it applies for across the sectors. So let's understand what are the provisions of this scheme, the ELI scheme. So this scheme, which has been approved by the Union Cabinet with an allocation of nearly 1 lakh crore rupees, it is designed to provide incentives to both employees and employers. First time employees who are getting employed in an industry, in a factory, right, in the manufacturing sector, they stand to receive certain incentives, and the employers who are employing them, right, who are recruiting first time employees, these companies, these factories, industries will also get an incentive. So it incentivizes both employees and employers. The government is hoping to create around 3.5 crore jobs through this incentive scheme over the next 24 months. It is expected to introduce around 1.9 crore beneficiaries into the workforce for the first time, creating much needed jobs for India's youth. So, under the scheme, the EPFO, Employee Provident Fund Organization, has been given the responsibility to implement this incentive scheme. And it essentially provides 15,000 rupees in two installments for first time employees. Those who have a salary of up to 1 lakh rupees or below, they are eligible for this incentive if it is their first job. The first month's salary, the equivalent of their first month's salary, or up to a maximum of 15,000 is paid out in two installments if they complete a minimum service of 6 months and 12 months. Let's say your salary is 15,000 rupees, right? Now you're employed for the first time, it's your first job. Then if you work for 6 months, the government will deposit 7,500 rupees in your bank account through direct benefit transfer. If you complete 1 year, another 7,500 rupees in your bank account. So the equivalent of 1 month's salary or up to 15,000 rupees in two installments is paid out, which is quite substantial, if you ask me. So it's an incentive to encourage the youth to take up employment, particularly in manufacturing sector. The employers will also get an incentive. They will receive up to 3,000 rupees for up to 2 years if they provide for employment for more than 1 year. If they keep the employee for at least 12 months and above, this company will now earn 3,000 rupees every month, sorry, for the next 24 months. For 2 years, 3,000 rupees per month would be paid out by the government, by the EPFO to these employers, which becomes a very lucrative incentive for the industry as well to recruit first time employees and first time workers. So the whole idea is to push both the sides, the demand and supply, and create more jobs. But however, there are both pros and cons in this scheme. The advantage is that such an incentive structure, it will definitely incentivize the employers. It will incentivize them to be proactive, to specifically hire first time workers, creating more jobs in the market, contributing to job creation, right? Contributes to skill development as well. The companies will also stand to benefit. It will reduce their overall cost as they get subsidized from the government. It will create much needed job opportunities for employees. help solve the joblessness problem being faced by the country's youth to some extent. So there are several advantages of this scheme. However, there are concerns as well which are being highlighted. Especially labor unions and trade unions are worried about the scheme because they have seen such previous incentive schemes have largely benefited the employers. They fear that these incentives being offered by the government would be pocketed by these companies, especially those with bigger pockets. Initially, they might recruit workers, later fire them just to get hold of the incentives from the government. And they also allege a corrupt nexus also between government officials and some companies where they ensure these funds are channeled to companies, certain big companies, so that they can financially benefit from it. And this could be at the cost of the employees and the employee welfare. So trade unions, labor unions are concerned about the possible misuse of the scheme and how it might unfairly benefit the employers more than the employees. There's also a concern about EPFO being chosen to implement the scheme. EPFO has no such expertise in implementing a employment linked incentive scheme. So the choice of EPFO to implement the scheme is quite strange from the government, and questions are being raised on this regard as well. So these are some of the cons which are attached with the ELI scheme, but it does have significant advantages. Now, coming to the next article on the front page, we have some important updates about PM Modi's visit to Trinidad and Tobago. Yesterday, we discussed this topic in detail. I've explained why Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean region is important for India's foreign policy, and we discussed the role of the Indian diaspora as well. But today, we will talk about some of the initiatives that have been launched, the agreements that have been signed. Let's take a quick look. It's a very factual discussion, nothing much to explain here, but you should make a note of these important developments. Because the PM is on a visit to multiple countries, after visiting Ghana, he has covered Trinidad, Tobago. He is visiting Argentina, which we will discuss in the coming days. Maybe I'll make a separate video on it, as Argentina is very crucial. He's visiting Brazil for the BRIC summit, which is being held today and tomorrow, by the way. So all these are very important bilateral visits and engagements. So please make a note of the key developments in the India relationship with the Trinidad and Tobago, which is one of the Caribbean nations. India and Trinidad Tobago have signed key agreements in the financial space and in the pharmaceutical space, which is going to benefit Indian companies to access the Caribbean market. See, India has already become a global leader in the pharma industry. We studied this earlier as well. In the fintech space and in the financial space, there are many Indian service based companies which are global leaders, or at least they have a global presence. So the Caribbean market is a lucrative market for them. So agreements have been signed in this regard, which creates an opening for Indian finance and fintech and pharmaceutical companies to tap the Caribbean market. Trinidad Tobago has agreed to join India led initiatives such as the CDRI, the Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, and the Global Biofuel Alliance. The CDRI is a pet project of PM Modi, pushed by Prime Minister Modi as India's leadership role in the field of disaster management to create resilient infrastructure around the world which can withstand the impact of disasters. Given that the world is going to face more extreme weather events in the coming decades because of global warming, India has launched the global initiative called CDRI, and several countries have partnered with India to focus on building resilient infrastructure, disaster resilient infrastructure. So Trinidad Tobago has agreed to be a part of it. And at the G20, which India hosted in 2023, when India hosted the G20, we launched the Global Biofuel Alliance with Brazil and other countries to focus on alternate fuels such as biofuel. It is seen as a greener fuel compared to fossil fuels. It is seen as a transition fuel as well. So, India, Brazil, and few other developing nations came together along with few developed countries at the G20 summit to launch the Global Biofuel Alliance. Many countries are now joining the alliance as well, including Trinidad and Tobago. Next, India is providing a grant for taking up high impact projects in Trinidad and Tobago. India will be funding quick impact projects, with each project getting a grant of maximum of $50,000, maybe to improve the school infrastructure in a neighborhood in Trinidad and Tobago, or maybe to create better roads, to provide, let's say, solar lighting, or to provide electricity access or to provide a water tank. So these local high impact projects would be funded by India. These would be grants, not loans. India would be providing them as grants, and both sides have signed an agreement to ensure its effective implementation. So many such high impact local projects will be chosen, which will be funded by India, and each project will get a maximum funding of $50,000. So this is part of our development assistance that we provide to countries in the global south. India is known to provide development assistance to developing underdeveloped nations and small island countries as well, and assist in their overall socio-economic development. So this is an example of that. India has also gifted 2,000 laptops to help digitize education in Trinidad and Tobago. We have announced a $1 million grant to procure agro machinery equipment to strengthen agriculture. And India is going to help this country in millet cultivation, seaweed fertilizer, and natural farming to ensure that the needs of the people of the Caribbean region is met. And also, this could boost their export potential. Especially seaweed fertilizer has great potential not only to increase agricultural productivity in Trinidad and Tobago, but it can become a item of export, which can bring revenue to this country as well. So India is going to assist in these agricultural domains. And India has also supported the country in the field of healthcare by donating 2C ambulances and 20 hemodialysis units. India has launched a cultural initiative to train Hindu Pandits. As we discussed the other day, Trinidad Tobago has a significant Indian community who are descendants of the indentured laborers who were transported from India 180 years ago by the British. Many of them are Hindus, right? And they still have the age old connection with India. So Hinduism remains a dominant religion in Trinidad and Tobago. And India is building the cultural ties. And for that, we have a separate program which is being launched to train Hindu priests in Trinidad and Tobago. Both sides have agreed to collaborate in Global South initiatives. India is a leader of the Global South, and India wants the support of Trinidad and Tobago to build our partnership with CARICOM, which is a regional grouping of the Caribbean nations. CARICOM stands for Caribbean Community. All the Caribbean countries or in the Caribbean region, Latin America region, they're part of the CARICOM group. And India has very close ties with this regional organization. So Trinidad Tobago can give a push for India's partnership with CARICOM. And finally, India has signed agreements in the field of pharmacopoeia, that's basically pharmaceutical production, pharmaceutical standards and exports, sports, and capacity building and training. India is going to train the bureaucrats and diplomats of Trinidad and Tobago in our training academies and institutions. So, this is part of our capacity building initiative. These are some of the key outcomes of PM Modi's visit. So, please make a quick note of them. Now, coming to the next big article, there has been a development from Myanmar. As you all know, Myanmar is going through a civil war since 2021. Since Myanmar's military, the army, the Tatmadaw, declared a state of emergency and nullified the elections. Since then, Myanmar is back under the rule of the military junta. So, this military rule has been opposed by the pro democracy forces. All the political parties and pro democracy forces have come together to form a national unity government. And they have even taken up arms and weapons against the military regime, forming the People's Defense Force to fight back against the atrocities that are being committed by the military junta. As the pro democracy forces protested for the restoration of democracy, these pro democracy protests were brutally crushed by the military with the use of force. Civilians have been targeted and killed in large numbers, and disproportionate force, including airstrikes, are being used by Myanmar's military to target the civilians. So the opposition forces have come together. The National Unity Government, which has formed a parallel government, has aligned with People's Defense Forces, and they are aligning with various ethnic armed organizations. Various insurgent groups in Myanmar have been coming together to form a joint alliance of sorts, and they're mounting a joint attack against the military junta over the last 4 years. And Myanmar has suffered significant losses. The military regime, for the first time, has lost significant territory. It has lost strategic locations from its control. You can see in the map how the control of the military junta has reduced to just few pockets of the country around Yangon, Naipidav, etc. But most of the other parts of the country facing India, facing China and Southeast Asia, they have already been taken over by the resistance forces. In fact, in 2023, some of the rebel groups, including the Arakan Army, which operates along the borders with India, it aligned with other rebel groups and insurgent groups to form the Three Brotherhood Alliance. It aligned with other insurgent organizations and formed the Three Brotherhood Alliance. And together they mounted a series of coordinated attacks and they managed to capture vital border points, critical cities, trading checkposts, and as well as seaports and airports. And a large part of the country has now come under rebel control. That's why many experts are predicting a possible breakup of Myanmar between rebel controlled territories and the military controlled territories. So now the military junta, which is on the back foot, it is seeking out peace before the elections which have been announced. The military junta has promised to conduct the next round of elections in order to stabilize the conflict. And it has appealed to the pro democracy forces and the insurgents and rebel forces to agree to talks and cooperate with the military regime to pave the way for next round of elections. But this clearly appears to be a time buying tactic, a negotiating tactic by the military regime, because it is known to commit brutal atrocities against all these rebel forces and insurgents in the past. So, in response, the rebel forces and pro democracy forces, they have refused to cooperate. Because, see, why would they? Because they already know they have a clear edge over the military. Rebels are now controlling large parts of the country, including critical strategic locations. So, they would like to see that these areas are liberated from the military control and they would look to break up these parts for themselves. So they have refused to cooperate. And it appears that Myanmar's military is losing ground day by day. Because for nearly 60 plus years, the military junta has dominated the country. It has never ever showed any sign of weakness. And this is probably the first time where the military junta is reaching out to the rebel and opposition forces and pleading with them to cooperate. That tells you everything about the situation in Myanmar. This is something you need to monitor regularly. It's a very fast developing situation. Anything might happen in the coming days. As I said, there might be a complete breakup of Myanmar, where the country might split into these different territories ruled by different factions. And that will create some unique challenges for India. That's why this is a topic you need to constantly keep track of. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's quickly wrap up the discussion. Last two articles. On page 7, we have an article related to the Gini index, which is brought out by the World Bank. The Gini index score is a score of inequality. The extent of inequality in a country is measured by the World Bank through this index, the Gini index, right? Which is based on the Gini coefficient. Now, the Gini index score is computed based on income, wealth, and consumption patterns in a country. These are the parameters which matter: the income, wealth, and consumption levels. So, using this, the World Bank computes the Gini index score, which is rated on a scale of 0 to 100. This is the Gini scale, 0 to 100. 0 being the best score. So it's an inverse score essentially. Lower the score, better is your performance. If your Gini score is 0, it means inequality doesn't exist in that country. That country would be the most equal country in the world in terms of income gap, wealth gap, and consumption gap. And score of 100 means extreme inequality. It means very few people control the income, wealth, and consumption, with vast majority having no access at all to income, wealth, and consumption. So 100 is the worst score to have, 0 is the best score to have. So lower the score, better the performance, lower the inequality. And India has performed pretty well. India has been ranked as the fourth most equal country in the world after the Slovak Republic, Slovenia, and Belarus. These are the top three countries according to the World Bank report in terms of equality. And India happens to be at the fourth place as the fourth most equal country, which is even better than many other developed nations like UK, China, and as well as the United States. India's Gini score is a 25.5 compared to the much higher score of the other nations like UK, US, China, and the others. Now, this performance of India has been attributed to some of the poverty alleviation programs, socio-economic programs of the government of India. So, schemes such as Ayushman Bharat, the direct benefit transfer, Jandan Yojana, and various poverty oriented schemes, employment oriented schemes, all these schemes have been credited by the World Bank for India's improving performance with regard to reducing inequality. Back in 2011-12, India's Gini score was 28.8. We have improved upon this in a decade and further reduced the Gini score to 25.5. But of course, the results are debatable because, see, there are many other think tanks and experts who argue that India is one of the most unequal countries where just top 1% control almost 90% of the wealth, and 99% of the population is left to feed on the remaining 10% of wealth, income, and resources. Right? And also, if you look at the top ranking countries here, it's not that they have a great credibility. Be it Belarus, Slovenia, Slovak Republic, which are at the top, their credibility is also under question. So there are experts who have their doubts about this report, but the government has welcomed this report and it has given credit to the schemes and the success of these welfare programs for reducing inequality in India. The next article is related to the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. The Hindu carries a profile of the chief of IAEA who has attracted a lot of controversy. It has been alleged that the report of IAEA on Iran's nuclear program was used by Israel and US as a justification to launch their preemptive attacks against Iran that took place recently. So there is an allegation coming up against the chief of IAEA that somehow he colluded with Israel and US or deliberately brought up a report which would which could be essentially used by Israel and US as an excuse, as a ground to attack Iran. So irrespective of this controversy, let's keep it aside, doesn't matter for us. We need to focus on the organization. What is IAEA? What is its role? There can be a prelims question based on this. The International Atomic Energy Agency, it's an intergovernmental organization established in 1957. It's an autonomous organization set up through the IAEA statute. It has its own founding treaty. So it's an independent autonomous organization. Technically, it's not part of the UN system. Is that clear? Many students have a big confusion here. They assume IAEA to be part of the UN. It's actually not part of the UN system. It's an autonomous, independent organization, independent of the UN. But however, it reports to the UN General Assembly and UN Security Council. It does report to UNG and UNSC, but it is independent of the UN system. Here, it has its own founding treaty, it has its own statute. It is headquartered in Vienna, Austria, and India is one of the founding members. India joined IAEA back in 1957. So, what is the role of IAEA? Its primary role is to promote nuclear non proliferation, to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons technology, promote nuclear safety and security, and promote the peaceful usage of nuclear technology. So, this is the primary mandate of IAEA. So, it enforces the non proliferation treaty. It has a responsibility to inspect nuclear facilities in the non nuclear weapon states. So, according to the non proliferation treaty, the non nuclear weapon states, they're expected to sign a safeguards agreement with IAEA and the additional protocol to it. For example, India has signed this safeguards agreement, the IAEA safeguards agreement, along with the additional protocol, and we have opened up our civilian nuclear facilities for IAEA inspection. So once you sign these safeguards agreement and the additional protocol, the non-nuclear weapon states, as recognized by the NPT, right, they will have to throw open their nuclear facilities for IAEA inspections. These inspectors will visit and monitor the facilities and check whether any weapons program is being developed, or whether the safety standards and security protocols are being followed, whether the non-proliferation controls are being implemented, right? So IAEA gets access to these nuclear facilities when countries sign the safeguards agreement and the additional protocol to it. Then finally, please note down, IAEA has even been awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize for the incredible work it has done in preventing the spread of nuclear weapons technology. It, however, assists others in development of peaceful uses of nuclear technology for the civilian application. It also lays down the safety, security standards and protocols which are to be followed across nuclear plants and facilities. So this is the role of IAEA. So on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope it has been useful. I hope you guys have understood everything. If you did, please press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Have a good day.